So today I'm personally very excited about this. So there's now an integration between VaultSpeed and AutomateDV, and that's what we're going to be talking to you about today. So data automation on DBT with VaultSpeed and AutomateDV. So I'm hosting with two colleagues, people from VaultSpeed today. So I'm, again, Alex Higgs. I've introduced myself already, product owner of AutomateDV, and over to you at VaultSpeed.
Yeah, I can start from our side. So my name is Jonas from VaultSpeed. I lead our solution engineering team. And today, we're happy to announce this integration together. So ready to kick off the webinar and the demo. Over to my colleague Mardiros.
So yeah, I'm Mardiros, happy to be here, and I recently joined VaultSpeed as a solution engineer, and I'll be presenting the integration.
Thank you very much, both. Thank you. Okay, so just a brief overview of the agenda. So we're going to talk a bit about sort of why this came about, why adding VaultSpeed into the mix to AutomateDV and vice versa, why that's important and how it's going to help you as the end user, and why DBT alone isn't enough is going to be the main subject there. We then talk about how they work together, what each brings to the table, how it works end to end, so what the workflow looks like if you're sitting down as a data engineer or a data modeler today. Looking a bit about how VaultSpeed works for those who haven't seen VaultSpeed before, and then over to the demo to kind of see exactly how it works live. And then we're going to do a short Q&A at the end. So please make sure to ask questions as we go, and we'll make sure those are answered at the end. Thank you. Anything to add there, Jonas?
No, looks good. Let's go.
Great. Okay. Okay, so let's go over how this came about, what the challenge is. So let's talk about kind of pre-DBT first of all. So pre-DBT, you often see quite a lot of development teams building Data Vault by hand, kind of trying to work out how hubs, links, and satellites work themselves. Potentially, finding the pitfalls that many of you may already have found yourself with taking that approach, making sure all the standards of Data Vault 2 are met, and so on and so forth. There's a lot to deal with there. So what tools like VaultSpeed and AutomateDV do, in part, is look to solve, first of all, the coding challenge there. So Data Vault is very template based, so providing all those templates for you so you don't have to worry about the code part of it. But not just that, there's a lot of processes around Data Vault, more than just deploying hubs, links, and satellites. There's things like how do we manage change control, if columns needed to be added to a satellite, if a business rule needs to change, if we adding a new source, all that kind of stuff. How do we manage all those processes for maintaining the Data Vault correctly as per guidelines, and just generally following good practice of deploying data warehouses, regardless of whether it's Data Vault or not. So how do we follow all those processes in a robust and streamlined manner with as much automation as possible? And that's where VaultSpeed and AutomateDV come together, and we're going to show you that. So where AutomateDV comes in is we generate the SQL, so the hubs, links, and satellite SQL in this case, and more. There's other Data Vault 2 templates available as well with AutomateDV. And the idea is because of the way DBT works, it doesn't matter what platform you're on. AutomateDV can support building cross cloud. And within DBT. So because AutomateDV is part of the DBT ecosystem, you get all the really powerful benefits of DBT, which include the testing, the generation of the documentation website, all the lineage, and kind of all that other stuff around it. What you don't get is metadata management and the Data Vault modeling piece, which are probably two of the biggest processes in Data Vault that aren't yet covered. And over the years, we've had a lot of customers on the AutomateDV side come and sort of say, okay, so how do I integrate modeling? And we've always had to say, well, at the moment, it's a manual process. You have to do your modeling, and that kind of has to be handed over to the developers. And in part, that is just as a result of the fact of how DBT works. It covers the transformation bit. It covers the T and the extract. Sorry, the T, mainly the T in ETL. So it does all the transformations very well. You can do the business rules. You can build your hubs, links, and satellites. But that's about it. It's a tool that does one thing very well, but it was never intended for modeling. It's never intended for a use case like Data Vault. So where VaultSpeed comes in is covering the metadata, the modeling, and all the other stuff that VaultSpeed brings. And that's where I hand over to you, Jonas.
And I think you explained it quite well already. Yeah? So where VaultSpeed fits in is exactly to cover that gap that you have in the design phase of the data vault and how it should actually be conceived, what the data vault itself should look like, and the whole process around that exercise, the modeling, the definition of the business keys, the tagging and the management of the metadata when you build it first, but also over the life cycle of the data vault that you are building and conceiving and maintaining. Because if there's one thing that is, it's very easy to build a data vault once, but keeping it in line with reality, with constant changes in use cases where you have mergers, acquisitions, all kinds of events that lead to big changes in our corporate data warehouses. Yeah, that's where VaultSpeed can help with that management in mind. This is a bit how we have built together with Alex and the team the full end-to-end pipeline, right? So you start actually designing the data vault in VaultSpeed. So managing the metadata, there's two types of metadata for us, and we'll show that later on, the more top-down metadata conceptually, but also the source metadata that you need to have a full physical model for the vault. So that's what you do in VaultSpeed. Then VaultSpeed has an API or an SDK available that allows you to export all the metadata, so everything that is needed, the full end-to-end lineage, the way the data vault is built and conceived, and the way the hubs, links, and satellites are modeled. So all that metadata that sits inside the repository in VaultSpeed can easily be exported. And we've built an integrator, and Mardiros here will demo that kind of interfaces that to the API of AutomateDV, because then you can generate your code with the AutomateDV packages, and of course run it at scale in your dbt cloud environment. So that's a bit how the end-to-end flow works. And Alex, on the next slide, we have a bit more information on the key part that VaultSpeed tackles here, which is the data vault modeling in a very visual way. You will see that in our demo. But at first, and that's where we always start, we start with a top-down approach. And that means you have to start with your conceptual data model. So you're not modeling hubs, links, and satellites here yet. No, we're actually explaining to VaultSpeed how your organization works, how business entities relate to each other. I think in the demo, we will have a banking demo. Could have been any, this is a problem that lives in many industries. But in this case, you would have accounts, you would have customers, you would have loans, things like that, and how they relate to each other. So that's where we start. And if you hit the enter button, Alex, then you will have the second component, which is the source modeling. So one input is top down. The second input is actually bottom up. We need to understand from every source that you're integrating into the vault, how that source on itself is conceived, how the data is managed on the operational systems. Could be your CRM system, could be an ERP, could be a core banking system, whatever you want to integrate. But VaultSpeed needs to understand how the data lives in those horizontally distributed systems. And if you have managed to explain us for all the sources what those systems look like, we can actually map that technical metadata to the conceptual model. And on the final part of this slide, Alex, you will then see that we can automatically generate for you the data vault model on itself, right? So the hubs, the links, the satellites, point in time, bridges, all these things are supported from a modeling perspective. And if you have finished this 3-step exercise, then VaultSpeed's metadata repository basically contains everything you need to know, or everything it needs to know to produce any kind of code, right? So obviously we can then also produce code with AutomateDV. And the cool thing is, if you have run this process once for the first build, and that's not where it stops, you can also always iterate. Data Vault was always conceived as a very agile methodology where you could start small and grow as more sources need to be onboarded, as more use cases need to be supported. So that's actually where VaultSpeed version management within the metadata repository that we have allows you to run this cycle throughout to really have that iterative design and iterative build. And then the next step is back to you, Alex, because now you need to explain us a bit more about AutomateDV itself, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jonas. Okay, yeah, I'll continue. Okay, so just a little bit of background. I've explained some of this already, but just to kind of set the scene, get everyone on the same page here. So AutomateDV started back in 2019 as essentially a tool to lower the barrier to entry. So at the time, there were no kind of free open source approaches to doing Data Vault around. And we wanted to bring Data Vault more to the masses, demystify it a bit, allow it to be more user-friendly, put the templates in the hands of people and allow them to kind of do the harder bits, which has always been the modeling and talking to the business, and building a solution that works for the business, not just the technical bit. So we wanted to abstract as much of the technical work out as possible, and provide all the templating and kind of the engine for generating the Data Vault SQL. And this allowed for rapid iteration. So you could build some hubs and satellites and some other objects, realize you needed to add some columns, try again, and keep going through that process, as Jonas says about iteration. But that process has always been more of a manual process until now. So again, initially AutomateDV was started as a really good way to kind of prove out Data Vault before maybe migrating over to a more a tool that kind of included more features, a bit like VaultSpeed, for example. But now it's growing into something quite a lot more. It's used in production in quite a lot of big organizations. And we've always had the advantage of being built on DBT, which is a very powerful kind of ecosystem, a really good framework, kind of built by developers for developers. But you're still kind of living in the code. So it doesn't have a lot of those things around it that tools like VaultSpeed bring. And it is never intended to be that, but adding some of that is very powerful, which is where tools like VaultSpeed come in. And we'll obviously explore that a bit more as we go. So AutomateDV itself is also metadata driven, as is the Data Vault approach. So essentially, all of the templates you provide metadata to. This metadata looks like columns. So you say, okay, my primary key for a hub is this column, and the load date time and the record source are this column, and the natural key is this column, and so on and so forth. And it goes away, takes those columns, uses those columns to generate the hub SQL or the link SQL or whatever other model you're generating, and then deploys to the database of choice. And then from there, you can build your business vault, you can build your marts, and then eventually feed the downstream dashboard. So kind of the standard approach there. But again, it's always been very code first in terms of defining the structures, defining what your hubs are called. You've never needed to write SQL unless you're building your business rules, your transformations on top of the raw vault. And eventually we do plan to expand into kind of the information layer. So being able to support building dimensional models and things like that, adding more kind of testing approaches as well. At the moment, this is what we provide. So that's kind of where AutomateDV fits. The standard. So this is kind of a standard Data Vault data warehousing architecture. So you've got your sources, your staging, your raw vault, information layer. And AutomateDV essentially fits at stages 1 and 2 here. So staging and the raw vault, that's where AutomateDV comes in. And DBT essentially covers everything from the staging through to the information layer. So it kind of sits on the warehouse, assumes your data is already living on in your warehouse of choice. So let's say Snowflake. And then of course it doesn't do the dashboarding part. That's where things like Power BI and things like that comes in. So DBT and AutomateDV essentially live on the bronze, silver, and gold layers, and then outside of that, everything to get to bronze and everything after gold is kind of up to external tools. Okay, so the next bit is how does this all integrate with VaultSpeed? So what we've done is we've built an API in between DBT and AutomateDV, which essentially takes metadata provided by, could be human written, it might be generated by an external tool, and then that metadata is used to generate all of the DBT files that are needed to deploy a data vault solution. And of course, in this case, that metadata comes from VaultSpeed, and that's what we're going to show today. So over to you, my data modeler.
I'll give Mardiros here some time. There you go. And as you saw on the slide, I think Mardiros in this demo will be the data modeler, conceiving the data vault. And then at some point, Alex, I expect that he will hand it over to you to try and make sense of all the DBT code that was generated with your package and deploy it, right? Over to you guys.
Okay, so like we mentioned before, any good data vault starts from the conceptual model. A conceptual model will basically be the bridge between the business people who know the domains and the engineers who know the system. So in our case, I've set up a simple banking system. So you see the familiar entities like customer, policies, payment, accounts, etc. Then we'll go over to the source modeling in VaultSpeed. So here you will see the releases, and in the editor you can drag all objects and you'll see the technical view, the bottom-up view of your data vault. In the source editor you can define your business keys, set your relationships, and all the technical aspects that your data vault needs. And then using that top-down of the conceptual model and the bottom-up of the source editor, we'll generate a data vault like you see here, with hubs, links, satellites. And if you zoom in, you'll see the familiar concepts like customers, credit cards, transactions, accounts of our conceptual model. Now onto the integration itself. So when you launch it first, you'll need to log in with your VaultSpeed credentials. And afterwards, you get presented with this screen where you can select your project, your data vault, a data vault release. And then in my case, since I'm working on Snowflake, I'll set up my target database and target schema. You also have the option of pushing the models that the tool generates directly to GitHub. So now I'll press generate complete project. And under the hood, what this does is it's using the VaultSpeed SDK to get all the metadata of the data vault that you just saw and feed them into the AutomateDV package to generate the DBT models. So it's taking all the definitions of the business keys, hash diffs, hubs, links, and satellites, and then generating DBT models from it. So as you can see, I have a total of 60 models, 15 hubs, 15 links, and there's also like 15 staging files. And if you go over to the data vault overview, you'll see 15 hubs, 15 satellites, and again 15 links. Back to the integration, I can immediately push this to the GitHub that I've set up. And now if we go over to our repository, we'll see a new commit has been made with all the models that the tool has generated. So now you'll have all your models versioned on Git, and you can hand them over to, in my case, my data engineer, Alex. So I'll give the word to you, Alex.
Great. Okay, so this is the project in DBT Cloud that has just been pushed. And I get asked this a lot. So AutomateDV can run on DBT Cloud or the DBT CLI or DBT Core. So it can run on either. I'm just showing it in the DBT Cloud view here, just because it's a bit nicer for demos, looks a bit prettier, but it can run on either. So let's go through. So for those of you who haven't seen a DBT project before, most of the time as a developer, you're going to be living in the models folder. And what this means is, so the model, of course, is quite an overused term in the industry, but in this case, a model just means a file that represents an object in the database. So it's a model for how something goes into the database. In this case, it's SQL files. Those SQL files represent one table each. So for example, we'll have a hub file, hub accounts.sql. Hub accounts.sql will be materialized or created in the database of choice, in this case, Snowflake. As hub accounts, it'll be a table called hub accounts because we've named it hub accounts, and DBT will therefore look to deploy a table called hub accounts. In this case, we've got it's a hub table, so we're using the hub macro in AutomateDV. Usually this would have been written out, but for the first time, I'm presenting something where this has actually just been generated by another tool, in this case, VaultSpeed. And what will happen now once I'm about to run it is DBT behind the scenes will take the SQL that gets generated by this macro, which is essentially a big function that takes in these parameters, generates all the SQL, and then throws it over to DBT, which then gets executed on the database. And then here's the metadata. So like I said earlier about providing column names, these are all column names that look to, these should be existing in the staging area, so in this case, stage accounts. And you can see the lineage here. So hub accounts feeds from stage accounts, feeds from our accounts data and in the banking data. And that's essentially how that works. So if I were to compile this, let's compile this before I run it. You'll see that this, the SQL that gets, hang on, sorry, 1 second, let me just, you'll see the SQL that gets generated is, there's quite a lot there. It's fairly simple for a hub, but it takes in the data, it dedupes based on the hub loading pattern, and then it gets inserted. We can look at a link as well, and you'll see that's very similar to how a hub works. You'll get the idea, but it's essentially the same, but just using a different macro, slightly different, more keys because it's a link. And we can say the same for satellites. It's going to be a bit more complicated because a satellite, deals with history, and the loading pattern in the SQL is a bit more complex. And you'll see this is the SQL for a satellite, for example. So that's all generated by AutomateDV. And this file itself has also been generated by VaultSpeed. So far, you've not actually had to write any code or understand exactly how Hub SQL works. You've not even had to write the metadata at this point because VaultSpeed's already generated that. So let's do a run. And you'll see what's going to happen now is DBT is going to go through all these files. We've also got some staging files here as well that sets up all of the hash columns and things like that. But DBT is going to go through all the files, so the 60 files that were generated, and it's going to start loading into Snowflake. So there's nothing there at the moment. If I hit a refresh, you'll see that things are starting to load in. So we've got most of that is there already. We've got some views. So the views are the staging area, and then we've got the tables which are materialized for the raw vault as well. So should be, there you go, already finished. And you can see now that we've got our hub links and satellites. So I can look at hub alerts, for example. Oh, hang on. Let's have a look at one of these. So staging, for example, is just loading 100 records or just querying 100 records. But you can see this is all the staging, generated all the hashes using AutomateDV. It's got all the original columns in there for the audit trail. We can look at a hub. You see the data is in here for a hub using all the standard loading patterns. So you've got the four columns we expect. We can look at a satellite. So this is the account satellite. So we've got some information about what type of account it is, what the balance is. Luckily, this is sample data, so I'm not giving any any bank details away. But yeah, and you can see everything else here has been generated. One of the areas I haven't covered yet is the staging. So I'll briefly explain how this works in AutomateDV, but what this essentially says in staging is, okay, I want a constant column, in this case record source. I want that to be derived as a derived column. So it's a value, the column's value is taken from another column or a constant, in this case the constant, defined by an exclamation mark. So that's basically a little bit of syntactic sugar that says always put the value stage counts in this column. Same for load date time. And then we've got all the hashing. So behind the scenes, AutomateDV will take the account ID column, apply a standard hashing algorithm, and then name that account's HK. And you can see, if I compile it quickly, this is all code you really wouldn't want to write yourself, especially the hashing, because if you're copying and pasting that and writing it yourself, you're going to quickly get probably some horrible hashing inconsistencies. But this is all the hashing that it's doing behind the scenes, and some of the derived columns, you can see the constants there. And again, this code that you're seeing now, that's generated by AutomateDV, but the definition for the table itself has been generated from the VaultSpeed metadata. So this has all been generated here. So usually would have had to write this out, and that's not, in itself, writing this one staging file, not too bad, but quickly, we've got quite a few staging areas here, and we want to make sure that these columns are in the same order whenever we define some of these hashes, and that when you've got a larger team of developers, that kind of thing can sometimes get through code review. Generating and automating as much of that as possible is where you want to be to reduce the rate of error and the human error in the process, especially when you're dealing with this at scale. So this is only 60 models, but imagining an even larger project, it just gets worse. So having something about VaultSpeed in the mix to be the central repository for all the metadata and just generate your code without having to worry about all of those things I just mentioned, is where it really becomes a powerhouse. So yeah, thank you very much for the modeling on that side. I think that's everything I wanted to cover. You can see everything's been generated. It's 45 now, so 45 tables and 15 views for all the staging.
Yeah, I think that adds up.
Excellent, thank you.
With what Mardiros showed in his demo. So
yes, 45 plus 15 is 60, I believe. Yes.
Yes, should be right.
Yeah.
Before we go into QA, so I already posted if there's any questions throughout the webinar or at the end, we have a QA. We will monitor the chat too, because I know people like to throw the question just anywhere, but we have some QA at the end. So thanks again, guys, for the demo. I think, the key takeaways here are what we've seen is that you manage the data model, the design, really from that conceptual level all through VaultSpeed. And from there, it's an iterative process to really push these sets of metadata, the version metadata, out through the code generator in the AutomateDV package, where you can then, basically typically through Git, expose it to any flavor of your DBT runtime. So whether it's DBT Cloud, the one which Alex demoed, or DBT Core, or the Snowflake DBT project implementation, you could run it anywhere, right? And you can run it at scale. So that's the whole point. This was just a small banking demo data vault, but as Alex explained, complexity adds up quite quickly and quite easily. So with this end-to-end flow, we want to try and help everyone to make that a bit easier. Cool. On the next slide, Alex.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, we can talk a bit through what's next and also open up for QA. But first, maybe the first question on everyone's mind is, how can I try this? How can I get started and see for myself? The first thing you would need to do is to design your model, right? The cool thing is if you have or happen to have Snowflake, for example, or you want to try a free trial at Snowflake, you can find a free trial of VaultSpeed also on the Snowflake marketplace. So if you have Snowflake available and want to try VaultSpeed for free through the marketplace, you can do so. So that's step one. And the second one is that the package that we built together, we are going to publish it on our labs. So the link you see over there, that's where we will publish this integration with AutomateDV. We still got a few things to figure out there, Alex, on how to do it exactly, but it should be up soon. And then who better to explain us how you get access to AutomateDV itself than you, Alex? So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So AutomateDV is available on the DVT hub, DVT package hub, essentially. It was actually been available there. I remember when it was only 10 packages available on the hub, so it's been available there for a while. It's also available directly from GitHub. So yeah, that's all you need to know. And we also have extensive documentation available at the link on the right there as well. So automate-dv.readthedocs.io. And that talks you through everything from some of the concepts to exactly how to build it, all of the configuration options and everything you need to know to get started and hands-on yourself.
So I think with that, we can open it for Q&A because I already see the first question there. I'll read it to the audience. So can we automate the creation of YAML files as well with VaultSpeed for our models? I guess that's the point, right?
Yeah, you can generate the sources.yaml of your tables, so you'll get an overview of all your tables as well as the target schema and target database.
Yeah. So the answer is
So just from my side, so the API at the moment is limited to just models, as in the AutomateDV API. But it's on the roadmap to expand that to test generation. So all the YAML files for your tests, including like descriptions and everything. So if there's any descriptions defined in VaultSpeed, it's on the roadmap to have those come through and generated as well. Yes, it's limited at the moment, but we have big plans for how we can expand that. So some exciting stuff, yeah.
We had an issue with DataVault and DBT when we change a model. Feeding a multi-model hub and perform a full refresh, we see unexpected results because not all dependent models of the hub refresh. Does VaultSpeed address this?
So multi-source hubs or links, satellites aren't multi-source for reasons how they work in DataVault, but multi-source hubs and links, the way they work in DBT is, I wouldn't say it's a limitation, but just the way DBT works, they have to be a union. So I won't go into lots of detail on that, but AutomateDV has to do a union of the two sources first and then feed the hub, whereas a lot of other DataVault approaches load them in parallel. So because of that union, what you're talking about is actually a limitation of the current approach. And we do have some plans to help with that particular problem. By doing basically a partial load. So if one table hasn't been loaded, only load data from the tables that have been loaded. And we do have that on the roadmap for AutomateDV to solve. So it's not solved explicitly because it's an AutomateDV problem rather than a VaultSpeed thing to solve, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and yeah, from the VaultSpeed side, so building or modeling multi-source hubs is definitely supported. So yeah, it's a matter of indeed, depending on the code generation package you use, but from the moment that will be supported through AutomateDV, we can smoothly feed in the metadata through that as well. Yes. The next one I see here is, does it cover forward and backward compatibility, like moving to DV 2.1 and any future versions? And will that be easy? Yeah, I think from the VaultSpeed side, and I'll let you answer as well, Alex, but from the VaultSpeed side, we try to stick indeed as close to the standards on DataVault that we have out there for the parts that impact the part of the DataVault solution that we cover, right? I know in DV 2.1, there is a lot on JSONs and how you would model JSON and things like that. That's something that typically comes a bit earlier in pre-staging and stuff. But for the parts that cover modeling itself, we try to stay as close to the standard as possible. And we also have most of our engineers already trained on 2.1 as well. So that's from our side. I think Alex, I guess it's a bit the same, right?
Yeah. We try and keep as up to date as possible with all the standards. So as and when things come out, we'll add an update, support more of the standard if there are new standards. And of course, we'll work together with VaultSpeed to ensure that if you're using the VaultSpeed and AutomateDV integration and there's an update to AutomateDV, that kind of stuff is managed as seamlessly as possible for you.
Next one is, can we automate point in time and bridge tables? So from the modeling side, yes, that is covered. It's again a matter of pushing it to the package. Mardiros?
Yeah, so the integration currently it doesn't fully support it, but by the time that it releases to the public, it will support bits and bridges.
Yeah, I will add on to that. So the API that VaultSpeed uses for AutomateDV also covers all of that stuff. It fully supports all of the standard AutomateDV functionality. Bits and bridges at the moment, for those some of you may know, are going through a bit of a rework behind the scenes in AutomateDV. I don't have an ETA on when that's going to be released, but we want to kind of improve how they work in AutomateDV. So you can at this time generate that. Well, as Mardiros says, when it's released to the public, you will be able to. But we're constantly working on improving bits and bridges.
Yep. And when that lands, we will gladly pick it up to feed our metadata into it. Another one, there's a lot of questions. So 2 questions actually from Sanjeev. Thank you. What if I want to change the structure of any hub, link, and satellites? So I guess it covers the broader question of what if you have any changes to the model, right? And to any hub, link, and satellite, I think that's very broad, because a change to a hub, that's typically when you run into, oh damn, I've chosen the wrong business key type of issue. So we do have some Delta support for that from the VaultSpeed side. And I think again, Alex, it's a matter of because we haven't even covered the complexity of certain deltas in Data Vault yet. So changes to a hub, a link, a satellite, a new attribute, a new hub, a new link, a new satellite, things like that. So obviously they are covered from the versioning and the metadata diffs that we can automatically track within VaultSpeed. We can generate those deltas from a metadata point of view. And again, it depends on how we can integrate that into the AutomateDV package. But I'll let you talk a bit more through that.
Yeah, so today you will be able to generate the deltas as Jonas says on the VaultSpeed side. We have a roadmap on how we can improve how the change management works. So as Jonas says, there's quite a lot of standards and processes when changes and deltas occur in Data Vault that are good practice for following to make sure. For example, adding columns to a payload in a satellite, changing a business key in a table, hub links or satellites, all that kind of stuff. There are certain processes you have to follow, and we want to look at a lot of those cases and automate as much as possible, because these are those manual Data Vault processes that we were talking about at the beginning of the presentation that still can be and sometimes a headache for users at the moment. So some of those cases aren't covered yet, but we really want to cover as many of them as possible into the future.
How will it handle changes to a hub satellite for which you already have data? Indeed, if it's already loaded into production. If it's not in production, you can basically still throw it away. If it's already there, that's when the real trouble handles. Again, I think it's the same answer. We can manage that from the metadata point of view. And the code packages yeah, need to follow that, of course. And then the last one I see here is if you have the same data coming from multiple systems, how do you handle duplicates and conflicting records? I read this as how do you handle collision codes, things like that. I don't know what you think, Alex.
I think this could be talking around things like golden records as well. So if you have like multiple systems that maybe one you trust more than the other, and then collision keys and things like that. I would say that's something that do you guys handle that in VaultSpeed?
Yeah. So we support collision codes out of the box. So that's again from the modeling point of view, it's all supported. Yes.
Okay, and that kind of thing, we do support adding those attributes in AutomateDV, and again, we want to move towards using more of VaultSpeed's metadata over time as well, so that will be on the roadmap.
Let me go back to the chat. Retries. I think the retries part, if you need to reload because something failed, is more on the DBT side. No, Alex?
Yeah, there is actually a DBT retry command that is useful in certain contexts. If you're in development, a lot of developers, for convenience, prefer a full refresh, which is basically just fully reloading the table as if it's a first-time load. Lots of different approaches, but yeah, that would be something on the DBT side. And so when that handover happens between the modeler and the developer, it would be about how the developer chose to load it and execute it within DBT.
Yeah, fully agree. So one more neat comment from Shane. Hi Shane, DBT model ain't no model. Okay, fully agree. We should get that that misconception out of this world. So keep shouting.
Yeah.
Apart from
I usually don't have to. I usually don't have to clarify it, but as we were talking about VaultSpeed model, and data modeling,
you get this. It's
and
the same.
You've got like 3 different versions of the word model and what they mean. Yeah.
And now with the AI models and LLMs, it's becoming even worse.
Yeah.
So, okay. No, thank you all for the questions. Alex, I give it to you. It's your show, so I leave it to you to say the final words.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's pretty much everything. I think one question I did want to cover off before we kind of close out is I had one question what is one of the main advantages of using AutomateDV here? I had that I was recently at the VaultSpeed conference, and I basically turned around and said, using open source and AutomateDV, it gives you more control as developers, right? So I'll leave you with that. VaultSpeed does a lot of the heavy lifting, and AutomateDV allows you to have control over the code, and I think that's incredibly important to have those both working together to do that.
Thanks everyone. Thanks Mardiros. Thanks Alex. Thanks for having us. AutomateDV and business thinking. It was nice to work on this together and to continue working on our roadmap, right? Because it's definitely there.
Yeah.
And thanks.
Very exciting to see where this goes. And don't forget, if anyone here is interested in trying it out, wants to talk more about it, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk.